Okay, I feel like I gotta get down here so you can see me. Here is the next part of your demos. This is for the going big, making a pot that is taller than 18 inches. I'm gonna show you two different ways to go about it, but I would encourage you to check out YouTube, look at places like Ceramic Arts Daily, because there's a lot of different people out there with different ways of making big pots. One might just make more sense to you than another. Hopefully you have started by doing some research into ceramic history and finding forms that are beautiful and well proportioned that you would like to either copy or use as inspiration for your forms. If you haven't, I'm not saying you're a terrible person, but you're not being a good student. So do that. You think about, you're gonna spend a fair amount of time trying to get this right. Take a little bit of time beforehand and put all that effort into making a pot that's good rather than one that just comes out ugly. Just because it's big doesn't mean it's good, right? So keep that in mind. I'm gonna start by continuing to work on this pot. This is one that I started last night. You can see it's pretty big. I'm using the earthenware clay, honestly, because I need planters at home. You guys can feel free to use that low fire clay if you want, but remember, it won't go in a cone 6 firing, it'll get low fired. So if you want the red clay, it's in the closet, you can use it. With this one, I've thrown this bottom part of it, and then I've let it get leather hard overnight. It's sort of a softer leather hard, but the idea is now that the walls can support more weight, so I can add more to it and continue throwing. With this one, I'm going to give you a better view of it here. You can see it's pretty good size. I've left the walls fairly thick, right? So that they'll support the weight. I want this to be pretty durable. And sort of full disclosure, I actually, for this one, because it's such a big base, rolled out a slab and cut it to the size of the bat, right? So that I had a nice round flat bottom with consistent thickness, and then just threw on top of that, added clay to it and threw it. So what I'm gonna do here is actually slip and score. You wanna make sure that this rim doesn't dry out. For you guys that were in hand building and did the coil pots, this is gonna be really similar, just with the wheel. It goes a little faster. I usually will cover the rim in plastic, just a thin strip of plastic so that it doesn't dry and I get a good attachment for the next part, because what I really need to be dry is under here to support. All right, so I got a slip and score. When you're working on these big pots, keep in mind the speed of the wheel, and as you walk away from the wheel, turn the wheel off so that you or someone else doesn't accidentally step on the pedal and send this monstrosity flying. That's no fun. So I'll get that damp. I'm gonna come in here and score. Let the wheel do the work, right? I will get it damp again. So the idea is that I'm kind of turning the edge of this pot now into slip. All right. So from here, I'm gonna add clay. And there's a few ways to do it. I could throw a ring without a bottom that matches and put it on here, but this is pretty wide. Obviously, you don't need to go wide. That makes your life a little harder. But if you want a wide pot, then go for it. The requirement really is just the height. So what I'm gonna do now is, instead of adding like a thrown portion to it, I'm gonna use a coil. If you guys need help on learning how to roll out coils, ask one of the guys from hand building. They can help you out with that. I've got a few prepared here. As you can see, they're pretty thick coils, right? And the reason is that I'm gonna put them on here and then continue to throw. So I'm just gonna push it on there. I wanna make sure it gets a good join all the way around. The coil doesn't have to be pretty, but my goal when I'm making these coils is for them to be even, right? If they're not even, it's gonna be harder to continue throwing with this because there'll be more clay on one part than another. Now they're not going to be perfect, right? That's just the nature of this. So I'll talk about as we get to that, how to work with that. Now rather than just going over top of that last coil, I just pinch it off. That I think helps keep everything a little more even. And I've got a little extra now in case one of my coils doesn't make it all the way around. I'll go ahead and add another one. You could even potentially add two. And I like to start them in a different spot so I don't have a weird seam kind of running up the pot. In fact, I'm going to start it opposite here. You can see this clay is very wet, right? That's what's going to allow me to throw it. It's straight out of the bag. You don't want clay that's too firm because you're not going to get a good join. And as I'm coiling this, I want it slightly to the inside because, of course, pots want to open out as you're working with them. So make your life easier by having it start to go in a little bit. All right. If your coil doesn't make it all the way around, just start where that one left off and add another coil. I'm going to go ahead and blend these together a little bit. So essentially, maybe you can see here, I'm just smoothing it a little bit to help make it one piece of clay rather than a couple seams of clay running horizontally. So I didn't show you the first part just because I feel like you start with as much as you're comfortable throwing. If you can throw 6 pounds of clay, great, start with that. If 4 pounds is it, start there. You're just going to add to it later, and you can keep building on it. All right, so again, smoothing these things together. And if you take your time a little bit, of course I'm kind of rushing. Right, but getting this clean, and the more even it is now, the easier it is to sort of center and throw here in a second. Okay. Now for the good part. I'm going to get some water on it. I want to be careful not to soak the bottom of this thing because obviously every time you do this, you could be adding water to the bottom and make it weak. So I'm just trying to get this top portion here. And I'm going to start, not just by pulling it, because it's not really even. I'm actually going to, I'll kind of come over here so you can see, I'm compressing it a little bit. All right, so I'm kind of pushing it down to help join it together, but also to help center it, right? Because you're going to feel that it's very bumpy, kind of lumpy, uneven. And I want to take as much of that out now. All right, so I'm just using my finger to push down and using on that right hand, and then using my left hand to kind of squeeze the sides and keep it centered as it comes down. A serrated rib is nice for this as well because it can kind of help tear the surface up and even it out nicely. If the bottom's not quite dry enough and you start pushing down too aggressively on this thing, you can end up collapsing it. So make sure you're not getting greedy, right? Make sure that you're not trying to do this too early or trying to push it too hard. And now that I've got it fairly centered, I can go ahead and start to pull. Right? Again, I want to keep the walls a consistent thickness. And work on making them go in. Even though I want this pot to kind of come out as it goes up, I'm going to start initially with it going in because you can always bring it out. Something like this is going to be a real pain to choke back in. All right. So, you know, this could be a jar, it could be a vase that you're making, it could be a planter, right? That's fine. Whatever floats your boat. So it's gonna be a little uneven, and you just kinda gotta go with it, right? You just gotta get it as best you can. Keep it nice and slow. If you hit this thing full speed, you're done. That's it. All right. So I think I can probably get another pull so that I've got this at the same thickness as the rest of the pot. And then start to think about shaping in terms of continuing the shape, right? Because initially here, it doesn't want to continue, right? You've got sort of harder clay and softer clay. So you have to be careful. It's really easy to push out too much right here, just above where it's stiffer, and have this weird sort of roll of clay hanging out over it. So I'll use a rib here. Right, I like this wooden rib for this because it's nice and stiff. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to help me keep it even. And I'm trying to keep this, I'm not worried about if the height is changing. I'm worried about the thickness, that I want to keep that consistent. That is the goal. All right, so don't stretch it as far as you possibly can, because that is going to give you like way too thin of a wall, and it won't support that next coil. Yeah. So I'm going to get this into shape. Notice I'm leaving it thicker, right? Sit back from it, look at it from a distance. If you're not looking at it from a distance, you're really not getting a clear idea of the shape. I want to bring it out just a little bit more. Again, I'm very cautious with how I bring it out. Just a little bit at a time. Can always bring it out more. This thing's not going back in. All right, I like it. Good enough. So from here, now I can make sure I clean up any crud that I've dropped in the bottom. And I like to go ahead and just cut the rim so that it's even. You can see it's not even right now, and that's to be expected. So I'm just gonna go below the lowest point. Yeah, I lose a little bit of height, but then I can take this off, and then I'm ready to let this thing continue to get leather hard. Remember, again, I want to cover the edge. Like if I'm gonna sit it outside, I don't want that edge to get crispy. That's the first thing to dry, and it's the last thing you actually want to dry. I'll make sure I keep cleaning up the inside. I don't want to leave a mess in there or a bunch of water. And great. I also like to just curve these a little bit so that the middle is kind of the high point, just barely. It'll give me a better attachment so that I don't trap air in there. Okay, so then this thing can just sit, get leather hard. I would strongly recommend working on more than one at once. And that'll give you a better chance of getting a good one. So now I'm gonna show you another way to go about making these things. And that way is to actually make the pieces and measure them so that they fit together, and then let them get leather hard and assemble them all, right? So that can be another way to build with smaller pieces. You can just keep going. If you look on the chalkboard in the classroom, you'll see a sketch of a pot on there. So I planned out my pot, and I actually sketched that one sort of to size, but you could do it proportionally as well. But you know, feel free to get a big sheet of paper. Professor Scoggins could show you where the rolls of craft paper are and that kind of stuff if you want to sketch it life size, but you could also do, 1 to 2, 1 to 4 kind of ratio, and get your measurements that way. But that'll help me as I'm making the pieces, make sure that I'm sticking to this form and I'm not just sort of getting whatever comes out. All right, so I've already thrown the bottom, right? Well, not really the bottom. If you look, this is going to be a planter, right? It gets taller, and then it's going to have a sort of stand on the bottom. So the bottom, right, the part that would hold things is in here, but it's going to be up a little taller. So I'll have another piece that goes under it that's thrown bottomless. So this one I threw to 12 inches in width. At this point now, it is leather hard, so it has shrunk, right? It's now 11.5 inches. If I took this measurement now, nothing would fit. You need to get those measurements when things are wet, just like with the lids on the teapots. So I'm gonna throw the next section, and it's important that I get this measured pretty precisely so that I can get it to match. All right, so I know I need it to be 12 inches. I've got a bat here that is right at 12 inches. I don't like having to throw right to the edge of the bat, so we're gonna get a slightly bigger one, right? This one is 13 inches, and that's gonna give me just a little bit of room, right, to be able to actually work at the edge there. Okay. What's nice with having the measurements already sort of figured out and that sketch is that wherever this thing ends, whatever height I get to, I can look at the sketch and actually measure it and figure out how wide it should be so that I'm getting the form that I want. Let's see. Again, however much clay you're comfortable working with, that's what you should work with. I've got, I think, 5 pounds of clay here, but honestly, I think I need a little bit more. So let's see. This one is 5 and 3, so now I'll have 8. All right, we'll put those together. You don't have to go this big, but whatever works for you, right? You could build it in a series of small rings. They don't have to be super wide either. The wider it is, kind of more of a challenge you're making for yourself. But and if you really want a challenge and want to do something impressive, make a big pot and put a lid on it, right? Wouldn't that be something? Okay, so just like with the bowls, when you're centering something bigger, get it into center as much as possible before you start. One thing is it can be a little hard to measure the inside of the bottom. So I'm actually got the idea of measuring the outside, how much there should be from the edge of the bat to the pot, which would be, in this case, 1/2 inch. All right, so I'm going to get this thing centered, kind of cone it up and down, get it moving. Remember, you can hold the sponge, use that for water, start to use your forearm. And now for this piece, I don't need a bottom to it. You can leave a bottom in it. It can kind of help it not warp. But I tend to not really worry too much about it. And if anything, I'll leave like just a really thin sort of film in there. So when I'm opening, I can really just go right down, all the way down to the bat, right? Get a little bit more out of that clay. Of course, I need this thing to be wider. And to bring this out wider, I have to make sure that I'm sort of bringing it out with this hand, but this left hand is pushing down. It's keeping it centered with the heel, but it's also pushing down to keep it attached. If you just kind of pull it out, it's going to roll over itself and come off the bat entirely. So I'm just going to come back in here. And I'm really trying to bring it out from the bottom. Again, you know, if a little clay gets left behind, don't worry about it. And if there's no clay at the bottom, not a problem. You don't need it. Except for at least one part, right? One part needs a bottom. Unless maybe you're making a chimney pot. Oh, you could look that up. That would be cool. Alright. So, I know I need about 1/2 of an inch, not about, 1/2 of an inch in, right? Because if it's 1/2 an inch on both sides, that's an inch. This is 13, I want 12. Numbers. Alright. Get this to where I can read it. Yeah, and I need to come out a little bit more. I'm going to come out a little bit wider because I'll probably make it narrower as I pull it up. So again, just really pushing down as I pull this thing out. So now I can start to pull this thing up and just keeping in mind the form that I want out of this whole thing. Okay. Now with this, I'm able to go a little bit thinner because I'm assembling these things when they're leather hard, so they'll support a lot more weight. So I don't have to leave it quite as thick as I might when I'm doing that coil building kind of method. You notice I still, even though this thing is going to come out, I'm still throwing with it slightly in because I can always bring it out. Nice thing about this way too is if you mess up one piece, you've just messed up the one piece. If you mess up on that big one, you kind of messed up the whole thing. There is something satisfying about having a really big pot on the wheel. Impress your friends and neighbors. Now, it's not going to be perfectly even at the top. I'm not going to sweat it because I'll just cut it. I do want to leave this pretty thick right now because as it comes out, it's going to get thinner. So don't make it as thin as you can because it'll get like, there'll be nothing left as you start to bring it out to the width that you want. Not that every piece has to come out, right? So now I'm going to start getting this thing into shape. And from my measurements, I know that at 6 inches tall, this thing should be about 14 inches wide. So I'm just going ahead and taking measurements. I'm at about 12.5 and about 5.5 inches tall. So that gives me an idea of where I need to go. A little more up and a good bit more out. And so I want to keep checking this measurement. Yeah. And so I've got a little room to come in. It can be nice to have a little bit of extra clay at that top and bottom, just because it can give you a better join, and then you can shave it down. You can also think about, do you want to make that join, instead of trying to hide it entirely, you could make it part of the decoration and like put a coil around it and really make it like a band around it, make it look interesting. All right, so now I'm getting close. Let's see. Yep, I'm at 6 inches, great. And so I know I need to come out to 14, and right now it's 13 inches wide. And yep, just about right on there. You want these things to be a similar thickness so that they dry similarly. It's nice to make them all in one sitting if you can, because then they dry kind of at the same rate. When you assemble them, you want them to be the same stage of leather hard. All right. So now I am right about 14, right about at 6, and I just need to now get the shape that I want. So this is where this part is difficult. That coil pot is nice because you can just continue the shape, but here you really have to imagine it. So it's nice to have that other pot nearby so you can look at it and kind of imagine, what does that shape want to do as it continues on and up. So I know the bottom and top points are where I want them, and it's just what happens in between. You know, that I want this thing sort of slowly swelling. Step back from it, you know, get back a little bit, look at it from a little bit of a distance, get a good idea of what's really happening. You know, get up from it, walk away, not too far, right? Not saying just leave. All right, I think that's where I want it. I would double check my measurements. Okay, fine, I'll actually do it. Helps if I can read the ruler. 6, 14, and yep, right at ½ an inch. Okay, so I'm right where I need to be. The last thing I'm gonna do is to actually just even this top up. All right, hold that nice and steady. And then I'm gonna let this thing get leather hard. I'll go ahead and make the other pieces for it too, right? So they're all there together. But I think you get the idea here. So that is the other part. I'll go ahead and make a couple other videos of actually finishing these so that you guys can see that. But you might wanna, I'll put them up on canvas, and that way you can look at them later in the week and get, when you actually have these things to assemble, or at home or wherever, so you don't have to watch them tonight. All right, I can't wait to see you next week. Remember, Thursday night, 5 to 7, is the reception for Empty Bowls, the Empty Bowls event. So please do come if you can, and we could always use some volunteers to help out during the event or getting ready before the event. So just let me know if you'd like to volunteer. All right. Thank you. Have a good night.